Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream to discuss all things related to digital transformation. This is a tech agnostic view of the world of digital transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And I'm excited for today's topic. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, one that I love talking about, and that is Inside Industry 4.0. Really excited for this topic here today. We've got a great guest for you who I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. But before I do that, just a couple of logistical items here to get started. First of all, this is, as I mentioned, a weekly live discussion. We do same time, same place. Thank you for joining wherever you're watching today, whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, X, or TikTok. Thanks for being here today. And again, our topic today is Industry 4.0 reality check. So we're going to get into what manufacturing leaders need to know right now about Industry 4.0. And we've got the perfect guest to unpack that a bit. I'm going to ask our guest questions here today, but any questions you all have, please chime in with those questions, any comments, questions you have along the way. We want to pull in as many audience questions as possible. We are watching the chat, the stream across all the platforms. In fact, so much so that I'm going to ask you a question right now to the audience. I'd love to hear what city and country you're joining from today. Where in the world are you today? We'd love to hear from you, city and country, if you don't mind. I'm in Denver, Colorado today in the United States, and I'll let my guest tell us where he is today. And speaking of our guests, so our guest today to talk about Industry 4.0, Inside Industry 4.0, just to give you some background of Jeff Winter, he has close to 100 million views on LinkedIn. He's been named the #1 influencer in manufacturing and in Industry 4.0. So quite the credible guy, a guy I've been trying to get on the show for a while. And the stars finally aligned. We got him on the show, and I'm really excited to have him here. So, Jeff, thanks for being here today.
And I'm excited we finally made this work, too. I know we've been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah, I think we had some fits and starts, scheduling issues, all kinds of stuff between you and I. It was just a pain getting us together, but we finally did it. Finally happened. I'm excited to share the discussion here with the audience. So before we have you introduce yourself now and kind of what your role is and what your thoughts are about Industry 4.0, just tell us a little bit about yourself, like your upbringing in the space. How'd you get into manufacturing? Where did you get started? How did it evolve? Tell us your career story, if you don't mind, in a few seconds.
Sure. I guess little over 20 years in the industry, kind of grew up in technology, graduated electrical engineering technology, but immediately went into sales because I like dealing with lots of different people and working with lots of different environments. I've been in manufacturing my whole career, just to kind of state that. But what I've done is different parts of in the manufacturing process. I worked for hardware manufacturers, helping with equipment. Then I moved to system integrators, helping with doing projects and transformations. Then I worked for software companies. And so I've had a wide variety of exposure all to the same industry from different lenses. Plus, I've had different roles. I'd say most of my career has been in sales. Then I went into marketing and realized I have a better skill and passion for communicating to many rather than one-to-one. Then I learned I really like strategy and found out after I earned my MBA, it's its own field, and there's education and frameworks and models behind it. And so I've kind of been in strategy ever since, and it's usually strategy related to competitive advantage and go to market and kind of commercial strategy that I've been focusing on, and that's kind of where I'm at now. So there, about a minute.
Yeah. And what do you do now? Tell us about your role now, and tell us about Belden, where you're working now.
Yeah, so I'm about 4 weeks into a new role with Belden, and my title is Vice President of Commercial Strategy. And I was brought in because they're a 123-ish year old company that's kind of grown up making cable, wires, connectors, that sort of stuff. That's what they're kind of known for. They've expanded since then, have a pretty large portfolio. But when you're over 100 years old, it takes a lot to change a brand and the perception in the industry and to who we want to be. And part of what I'm here is to help with that, to kind of transition the brand from a cable and wire manufacturer to a data solution provider and someone that can help with advancements in digital transformation and Industry 4.0. And I think they have a lot of the right pieces in place. It's going to be putting them all together and communicating that to the world.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it's interesting to hear that you have this interesting background that spans across not just manufacturing, but strategy, marketing, sales, all within manufacturing space. So I'm sure you have a unique perspective that most of us don't have. So I'm really excited to dig into it here. Before I do, I just want to turn to the audience real quick and say hello to some audience members that have chimed in. Darian's joining on LinkedIn. Hello, good morning, Darian. Kaven joining from Montreal, Canada on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here today. And Roloff joining from LinkedIn from Madison. That's someone I think you know too, Jeff.
I just spoke with her a couple weeks ago.
Did you? Nice.
Yeah, on stage.
She's that's at the Industry 4.0 conference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Tomer joining from on LinkedIn from Illinois, and then Mario joining from Winnipeg, Canada, and then Michael's joining on LinkedIn from Germany. So a lot of people joining from LinkedIn here today, which makes sense because you have such a huge following on LinkedIn. But if you're joining on YouTube or anywhere else, let us know. I'd love to hear where you're joining from too. And then Cassiana just commented here on LinkedIn as well, joining from Romania. So thank you for being here today. So I guess just to start and set the context here for today's conversation, Jeff, when you look at some of the trends in Industry 4.0, what are some of the ones that you're most excited about, and which ones might you set aside and say these are overhyped? That's not a real thing. Tell us what's real in the trends space and what you're most excited about and what you're not excited about.
I'd have to say what excites me the most right now is the convergence of operational data, artificial intelligence, and just modern architectures. Because I would say for years, at least over a decade, we've been digitizing machines and processes, but we've been struggling to make the data truly usable and valuable. And now we're finally starting to see architectures emerge where operational data can flow in real time. It can be contextualized and actually support decisions. And then you can add on artificial intelligence to that to use that to actually change the way that we operate, to move us up the intelligence layer, to move us up the agency layer, and it can completely transform companies. Now, that being said, some of the hype around artificial intelligence itself, I would say, is maybe a little misplaced. AI is incredibly powerful, but it's not magic. And so if the underlying operational data is fragmented, poorly structured, or disconnected from the real work on the plant floor, which is what generates most of the data and would use it in the end, AI is just amplifying the weaknesses that are already there. And so the real breakthrough is not a new model. It's really an operating system, a new operating system for the factory of the future, meaning that the data, the architecture, and the workflows allow intelligence to be applied continuously everywhere. So it's not really directly a trend as much as you're starting to see these convergence of things happening, that we are on the brink of some really powerful things being able to take place. And some companies are doing it.
So I know you alluded to this when you were talking about data architecture and some of the changes that have made this all possible. But on the flip side, if you look at it, I mean, we've been talking about Internet of Things. How long have we been talking about Internet of Things? Like over a decade now.
Oh, yeah.
And so Internet of Things is supposed to change everything. We've got sensors. We're capturing data at every step along the way in the manufacturing process and the supply chain. So companies have been capturing this data, to your point earlier. What's different now, though? So they've had all this data all along, potentially. What is it about the architecture and the focus on data? Like, what are companies doing differently today to where they can actually take advantage of that?
So if you think about the idea, and this is where you can philosophically get to defining Industry 4.0. So Industry 4.0 can be thought of as a description of the era that we're in right now, the fourth industrial revolution. There was a third industrial revolution, a second, and a first. And if you think about like that, that's the era that we're living in right now. And it's about all the changes that are happening, in that era. But Industry 4.0 is unique because there was no Industry 3.0 or 2.0 or 1.0 as a term, as a moniker, a nickname given to that during the era itself. So that term came out in 2011 and was adopted as part of the German high-tech strategy 2020. And so it had a very clear vision of what manufacturing would look like in the future. We've never been in an industrial revolution that had also a vision of the future at the same time. So depending on if you view it as a description of our era or if you view it as a glimpse into the future, it changes how you're seeing it right now. So if you look at it as a description of our era, we have a ton of different technologies that have come out in the past decade that each one of them arguably could be transformative. And I say could be because by itself, it wouldn't necessarily do a whole lot. Everything from IoT, digital twins, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, edge computing, virtual reality, augmented reality. You could name this list of things. but it's really the convergence of all of them and how you can figure out to take advantage of which one in which way to transform the way that your company provides value, captures value, or the way that your company works. And so it's kind of all these together that allows it. And all the pieces over the past 20 years have been built up to a point where now it's becoming very easy to capitalize on them versus years ago it was harder to capitalize on. You know, IoT, 10 years ago, you can connect a lot of stuff. But if you just connected a lot of stuff, that wasn't transformative by itself. Now that you can connect it, now that you can contextualize it, now that you can link it to other systems, now that you can add agency and have action, you know, taken upon it, you can start to really do some powerful stuff.
Yeah. So the companies or manufacturers in general, or the manufacturing industry in general, has been building the pieces all along. So it's like almost like a puzzle has been laid out. You know, all the pieces were getting thrown on the pile, but they didn't really know how to put it all together. And now they're finally just starting to put together all these pieces. Is that a fair?
I mean, I don't want to say finally. Some have been doing it, you know, for 10 years. Others have barely started. So it depends on kind of how you're defining that particular spectrum. But for example, IoT is what I think single-handedly created the biggest part of this revolution. And it's because of the proliferation of data. We have now so much data that companies don't even know what to do with. I mean, there's studies out there. IBM says 90% of IoT data is never used. You look at IDC, they say only 3% of enterprise data is ever analyzed, let alone they do something with that data. So you have this massive amount of data that's not even being used. And it really started with IoT being able to produce it. And now that we're producing it, now that we're starting to take advantage, you can like move up a hierarchy of capability. So you might be familiar with like the Acatech Industry 4.0 maturity index as like, you know, 6 layers that you can go. So as new technology comes out or we figure out how to integrate them together, your capability keeps rising as you go up. So it's not a I achieved one and I'm done. It's a, hey, we did this. Now we can do something more. Now we can do something more. Now we can do something more. The baseline foundation was creating data, capturing it, and being able to understand it. Now it's what do you do with that data?
Yeah, that's well said. And the point about it being an ongoing journey, not a final destination you reach. You don't just get certified, qualified as I'm 4.0, I'm good. I'm Industry 4.0, I'm good.
I mean, there is nothing to say that. If you look at the Acatech maturity model, which others out there have followed, things like the SIRI, which is the Smart Industry Readiness Index, it's kind of based off a similar model. They have these levels and they work their way up. And the highest level in all of them is really related to autonomy, fully autonomous systems that can make decisions and act by themselves. All right. So if you look at that as the highest level, that's where AI is almost a requirement to be able to get to that level. If you look at these studies where they look at Acatech or where they look at SIRI, and you look at the average of the people that fill out the surveys, not the surveys, but get assessed by them, the average is pretty low. It's 1.55 for SIRI and it's 2.5 for Acatech, and that's 0 to 6, or sorry, 1 to 6 and then 0 to 5. So they're basically the same level. It means most companies are not even halfway to fully autonomous.
Still a lot of work to do and a lot of opportunity.
But there's huge progress to go from a 0 to a 3, but 3 is not a 5.
Right. That's interesting. Very cool. Want to say hello to some other audience members here. Tomer is actually joining from Israel. I thought it was Illinois. I was way off. So thanks for. And I thought
I know him, and I know he's not in Illinois.
Yeah, I saw his name, and I was like, I thought he was in a different country. I didn't realize he was in Illinois. So that explains a lot of things there. So thank you for that, Tomer. Sorry for the mix-up. Sanjay is joining from India. Thanks for being here today. Doug says, "Hey, there's Jeff." So you've got at least a couple fans here joining us. And then Tomer says, the question is whether we haven't been on the verge of technological business change for 15 years from the definition of the revolution 4.0. And it's kind of what you're saying is like, we've been doing this. It wasn't like we just shifted over to now we're in industry 4.0. The pieces were getting laid and organizations were moving along towards that path.
Well, this is where you also start to differentiate between how we define transformation. So let's also take a step back. An industrial revolution is a change in the entire industry, not the change in any one company. And a lot of people get that confused. You can have a company, let's say, achieve a level 5 or level 6 on those scales in every single category, and they are the most advanced company in the world. But if the other 99.99999% of companies don't achieve that, then the industry didn't transform. So this is the difference between an industrial revolution is when enough companies change. And so as enough of them change, the whole industry as a whole changes. So we have to separate out the industry movement versus individual companies movement. So if you look at that, there are some companies that are doing fantastic, unbelievable, futuristic things. They are in the minority. And this is where you look at it and go, there are some companies that even say in 2026, oh, we haven't done Industry 3.0 yet. Well, if you're still around in 2026, you survived the third industrial revolution. You may not have changed a thing, but you survived it. You're still here. A lot of companies went out of business. So the amount of necessity for what your company needs to do to barely get by is different in your industry, your company, and whatever your goals are. But the fourth industrial revolution, Industry 4.0, is changing the way that companies have to strategize, invest in what they have to build. So I would argue any company you have today versus any company you have 15 years ago, they are doing stuff differently. And a lot of it is a pretty big difference. Now, is it to the level of the German high-tech strategy vision that was, the picture that was painted? No, but they are doing things massively different than they were doing 15 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It makes total sense. Colin is joining on YouTube from Singapore. Thank you for joining here today. And then Michael on LinkedIn has a question for you, Jeff. What role will knowledge graphs play in that convergence?
Huge amount. So this is where, as you start to move up your levels of intelligence, as you do this, you start to understand more things of being able to identify it, being able to know what it is, being able to know what caused it, and then being able to know what it will cause as you kind of move up. And really, the only way to get to higher levels of intelligence is relational understanding. Otherwise, just a standard database won't give you that relationship. It may give you a hierarchy, but it won't let you know what is related to what. And as you're trying to build an intelligent factory, a truly intelligent factory, you need to understand it's not a database, it's a system. And these systems are complex. I mean, you have to think. Material goes into assets. Assets are constrained by maintenance. Quality issues propagate across lots, and decisions that are made over there impact stuff that's made over there. That's not captured in a traditional database. Really, you have to use knowledge graphs in order to capture all these relationships, and then use the knowledge models to what you apply the AI onto, so you can better understand how AI decisions will propagate across all those systems, rather than just optimizing an isolated use case.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So I'm going to ask you a question about what organizations are getting wrong when they start their digital or smart factory journey. But before I get to that, though, do you mind just giving us a quick intro / 101 crash course on what is a smart factory? How do you simplify that, or just summarize what a smart factory is?
Well, this is where there is no universal definition for it, just like Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0, I like to generally describe as a description of our era. It's more about the revolution that is occurring across all companies, not any individual company. Smart manufacturing, or the intelligent factory, or intelligent manufacturing, or you can kind of pick whatever you want to call it, is more of a smaller view of a description of the capability gained within the function of manufacturing, as opposed to Industry 4.0 can apply outside of manufacturing as an industry, or outside of it as a function. It can apply to supply chain. It can apply to engineering. It can apply to things that don't, directly relate to the actual production of what you're making. Okay. So this, once again, there is no universal definition for it. There's probably 10 different ones depending on what you want to do. There are IEC standards and ISO standards that attempt to define it. There are government agencies that attempt to define it. But I view it as oversimplified as smart manufacturing is your ability to have information in real time as to what is going on everywhere across your production, so that you are able to make decisions faster against that particular data. It's being able to take your decision latency, the amount of time it takes you to identify, to be able to interpret, agree, and act, and take that and shorten it as short as possible. In order to do that requires a bunch of technology, a bunch of changes in processes, different roles. It changes a lot. So now you end up having an intelligent factory at the end, where your decision latency is almost zero from when things go wrong or when things go right.
Interesting. So what is it that you see manufacturers most commonly getting wrong with smart factory?
Great segue. And part of it is because that's a high level, I'll call it inspirational definition, but it doesn't provide any clarity of purpose. So this is where I'd say there's really three interrelated ideas that would make it here. The first is clarity of purpose. The second is everything being labeled transformation. And third is transformation being treated like a project. So starting with clarity of purpose, it's really hard for companies and leaders to describe what their factory looks like at the end of any sort of transformation journey. Smart manufacturing. Hey, we're building a smart factory. I'd say poor companies have no answer, like not companies that aren't doing it well. Good companies can explain the new capabilities that are gained at the end, but they can't actually describe how those capabilities translate into a new way of working, how the factory is different than when it was before. That includes everything from operating models to processes to roles. They're just describing we have a new capability that our factory can do. But when I challenge to go, great, how does that capability change the way that you manufacture? And it becomes really hard to answer. I mean, I've done this just within the past 2 weeks where I ask companies and to go, great. So you have a digital transformation journey within your manufacturing. You're trying to build an intelligent factory at the end. Describe what that factory looks like once it's all done. Tell me what it looks like. How are things different? That is very difficult for companies to articulate and agree upon. And it gets back to they have a definition at a high level, which everyone agrees and nods, but they don't know how to take that down into all the decisions that have to be made on a daily basis so that we're all working towards the same thing. The second is everything gets labeled transformation. So I really don't know any companies that haven't gone through a digital transformation already or aren't in the middle of a digital transformation right now. And regardless of how you define what it is or what the outcome is, I view it as the big thing here is most of these companies take that transformation initiative and then they turn it into projects, we'll call it, and everything gets labeled then transformation, and it's pointing towards that particular objective that they have. And I view it as that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for a couple of reasons. One, you might find out I was dealing with one company that had a digital transformation initiative, and it was comprised of over 860 some projects, and realized like 80% of them weren't transformative. They were just modernization, optimization, just basic foundational projects that need to be done. But if you grade all 860 as a transformation, you're going to grade them wrong. You're not going to get the success that you want, and it won't lead to the transformation that you really need. Now, I bet you there's only a few of those that are truly transformative, that change the way that you work, that change the way that you create or capture value. I bet you a lot of them are just necessities that need to be done in order to enable a transformation. And then the third is treating transformation itself like a project or a collection of projects. So having 860 projects may not be the best way to do it because each one then gets treated as its own self-contained entity that needs to be on time, on budget, and not disrupt particular things. And when you do that, you miss the connection across all of them. You miss the fact that, but number 362 can't happen unless you do 118 first. And 118 also allows 6 other things. And it's once those are allowed that you can really transform. So if you treat it like that, then you're going to stall. And this is why there are a lot of famous studies out there like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Everest Group that have high levels of digital transformation failures, 60, 70, 80%. But then KPMG in 2022 came out with a study that said 99% of digital transformation projects return 1% ROI or higher. 99%. That means people are spending money and they're getting something back for it, but they're not hitting their objectives. So how can you have 70% failure and 99% return, in investments? And it's because they're labeling the projects wrong and they're treating it in the wrong way. A transformation project has very different KPIs than a modernization project. And I view it as if you treat your transformation like a project, projects close, transformations persist. Projects deliver artifacts, transformations change operating models. Now, don't get me wrong, projects are needed in there. And a transformation will include projects, but don't turn it into a collection of projects. Otherwise, you lose the strategy between them and the interconnectedness.
That's super interesting. I mean, even going back to the first point you just made in your response there around manufacturers needing to define and agree on what they want to be when they grow up. You know, what is this? What is this going to look like, or what do we want to become? How do we want this to look?
What does
And
it do? Not just the capability. Oh, we now can do predictive maintenance. Great. How does that change
yeah, what does that
your
mean?
manufacturing?
Yeah, yeah. How does that better service your customers? How does it make
Yeah.
it more profitable? Whatever KPIs you're tying it to. That's really interesting. And it's fundamental. What's interesting about what you're saying is it's true for any. It's not just a manufacturing thing you're bringing up here. This
Correct.
is just a more broad, any sort of change initiative an organization, even outside of manufacturing, might be going through. I think everything you're saying is very relevant to
For
them.
that answer, yes, it's applicable to all industries.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you see as and this is somewhat related to the previous question, but what do you see as the biggest disconnect between executive expectations and what's actually happening on the plant floor, especially when they're going through these transformative projects slash initiatives?
From an expectation point, I would say it's to move fast. And it's because technology evolves fast. And that puts a sense of urgency and a sense of fear on executives to either capitalize on it as a advantage or just to not fall behind as a disadvantage. But factories are not software environments. They're physical systems with regulatory constraints, quality requirements, legacy equipment, and deeply embedded operational practices. And changing them takes time. And so the disconnect often comes from leaders expecting rapid, visible progress while the plant floor is dealing with data integration, process redesign, training, cultural change, which are the real work of transformation. So
Right.
that would be the biggest one is the speed, and the second is the vagueness of how to use technology. And I'm going to use AI specifically. I don't know of a single executive out there that isn't telling their team to figure out how and where to use AI.
Yeah. Just
But
figure
do
it out.
they know how to actually give guidance on what specifically to do with it and what they're attempting to get out of it? So now you have pressure to use a technology with no real intended purpose.
Right.
Why are we using it?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, it's your comment about AI and the executives that are just throwing out this, let's go pursue AI. It gets back to the previous points you're making, which is okay, AI is great. All this technological stuff you've talked about so far is great, but why? Why are you doing it? Not because it's not a good idea, but help understand or help articulate why you want to do this and how it's going to improve your business, your customer experience, your employee experience, whatever it is, whatever objectives you're trying to accomplish.
And with that, I'll add, it was interesting. This was about 2 years ago when I did this more when generative AI was super new and interesting, is I met with quite a few executives of manufacturers, and I learned real quickly that they had a facade of understanding AI, but no real understanding, no real deep understanding. Now, I don't need executives to have a in-depth technical understanding, but they do need to understand just enough to know what it can do. Because here's a test I gave one particular manufacturer with the CEO and his direct reports, so the highest level of a $10 billion manufacturer. And I used a hypothetical and I basically said, okay, let's assume we had a chat GPT for your company and all the company's data was perfectly integrated, perfectly contextualized. All the collective knowledge and experience of the company was at your fingertips in this new generative AI, interface, chat GPT for your company. What would you ask it? And I
Mm.
gave them as an exercise to go give me the 3 questions that you would ask it. And I did that. And then the next day we came back and we reviewed the answers. And what I basically found is this exposed that they don't really understand the technology. And if they don't understand the technology, how are they going to be able to guide their teams? Roughly 50%-ish of the answers that they picked out of there were things that had nothing to do with generative AI. They were basic classical machine learning that we've been able to do for like 10, 15 years. Like, if that's what you're using it for, there's nothing generative about that except a prettier interface. The actual meat behind it is machine learning. We've been able to do that for years. There was
Right.
about 25% that was like a perfect use case. I'm like, this is a great example of how you should be using it. And 25% were just completely wrong. They either exposed ethical boundaries, not intentional, but just not what you should be using it for, or a complete misunderstanding of like, that's not possible today. Maybe one day in the very far future, but like that can't work. And so then you think about it, only 25% were like good use cases that these executives would actually use it for. How good do you think their AI strategy is going to be if that's their understanding of what generative AI can do?
Yeah. Yeah. I would think the industry can do better than that, better than the 25%. Yeah. Great points. I want to turn to the audience again too. We have another legend in the room listening in. Jan Baan joining on YouTube says, Eric, nice to meet you. Your podcast from the Netherlands. Jan is the founder of Baan Software, a manufacturing ERP system from the 90s. And now he's the CEO of a company called Rapid, which does AI driven workflow type automation. So thanks for being here, Jan. Interesting comment here from Tomer on LinkedIn. Tomer says the success rate of digital transformation projects are too similar to the success rates of SAP projects. I kind of want to turn this into a question though for you, Jeff. Do you find that manufacturers go find like an off the shelf ERP system, for example, like an SAP, Oracle, Infor, Epicor, whatever? Do you find that they go find the software and say this is how we're going to become a smart factory, or this is how we're going to pursue Industry 4.0? Is we're just going to go find the software and that's going to solve things for us? Or do you find companies like mixing up ERP technology initiative with true Industry 4.0 smart factory types of initiatives? Or
Good question. I'd have to break it into like two parts of the answer. So once again, this gets back to why are you doing it? Is it a modernization project? Is just your ERP outdated? It doesn't meet current requirements, current standards, and you're just doing it to stay current, to stabilize? That's very different than if you're looking to take advantage of all the features that are built in to get the most out of the system, optimization, or are you doing this to completely change the way that your company operates? Those are three massively different projects, all with the same software. So it depends on, once again, why are you doing the upgrade? Now, in terms of the software itself, I kind of see two general approaches that people take. We're either buying a software and we're going to make our processes match the software, or we're going to do it the exact opposite. We're going to look for software that matches our processes or build it ourselves if we can't find it. That's a fundamental, probably the biggest decision your company needs to do. And I can't give advice unless I know more specifically how your company operates, your digital maturity, your industry, how far your practices are the standard deviation from industry best practices and standards, to know, does it make sense for you to standardize what you do to the industry, or is the way you do it, unique, and that is an advantage in yourself? Now, from what I've seen in my experience, at least in the manufacturing industry, your ERP and your MES are the two software initiatives that are the most difficult and require the most amount of knowledge of your particular company and the way it works in order to be able to make it successful. So they're inherently going to have a higher failure rate, because you can't just implement the technology by being a technologist. You have to be functionally involved in how the company operates in order to make it succeed. And I believe, I know I'm biased, but manufacturing is one of the industries that so many companies differ in the way that they do what they do. I don't think you see that as much in healthcare or finance or retail, but in manufacturing, the way that you make ice cream has nothing to do with the way that you make a car. And like, there's almost nothing the same in terms of the way it's sold, the way that it's made, the way that it's stored, the way that it's processed. Like, almost nothing is the same. And so because of that, imagine how different an ERP and an MES system would be in those environments. And so the amount of knowledge required to pull it off successfully is way higher than most other systems that you would buy that could be more kind of repeatable to industry. And a lot of IT softwares are that way, where, hey, it functionally works the same in any industry.
yeah, you just sort of touched on and triggered me. One of my triggers as a consultant is this concept of best practices in prepackaged software. And you just hit it on the head, and it sort of resonated with me when you said, the way you make ice cream is so different than making a car. I mean, manufacturing in general, even if you just look at, you take it even further and look at a manufacturer of highly complex technical industrial products. How about comparing that to an ice cream manufacturer? I mean, that's just totally different. Now you're talking make to stock versus make to engineer to order, just totally different processes. And so when a software vendor, any sort of technology provider like an SAP or an Oracle, one of these big name vendors comes out and says, hey, we've got manufacturing best practices baked into our software. You want to be Industry 4.0, you want to be a smart factory, you want to modernize, whatever. then use our software because we have best practices. I mean, do you see that being a path forward? Because I always feel like that's going to lead you astray, and that's just going to constrain you more than it helps you in some ways.
I mean, I can't speak for all, but a lot of the big ERP manufacturer, the big ERP software companies, they are trying to get more into that landscape. And manufacturing was a bigger industry that actually helped push the whole concept of ERP software to begin with. And so they are realizing there's a lot of value in getting lower in the tech stack and connecting all those systems together so that ERP can be the master of everything.
Yeah.
The problem can be is, where do you draw the line between how low it goes and in what parts or what functions of the organization it does go? Because this is where the difference between, it might be technically possible, but no one knows how to do it. And then you're in a very difficult spot. But then secondarily, you're right. It's very difficult to apply some of those functions across industries. And that's partly why, if you look at some reports out there like IoT Analytics and their industrial software report, MES is the software category that's the most fragmented. And they define that as the most amount of vendors that are available. No one has any leading market share. There's no one that even has double-digit market share. And most of the companies in there, it's like 300 they evaluate, don't even compete with each other. They don't even consider them competitors. How can you be in the same software category and go, nope, we're not even competitors. We would never compete. And it's because the software is so specialized to a particular industry that, yes, the company's selling it to an ice cream manufacturer versus a airplane manufacturer. Like, I don't know what's similar about that software. Very little, outside of it's doing a similar conceptual function. But you need the expertise to be able to make it work for your particular thing. So getting back to the ERP, it absolutely can go down the stack in certain scenarios, but it can't in others.
Yeah.
And someone's got to figure that out. Is it the manufacturer or the vendor?
Right. Yeah, I would argue it should be the manufacturer that ultimately figures out what path makes the most sense to get you where you need to go. Here's a related, really interesting question from Christina on LinkedIn, and I'll have to read the whole question here because it won't show on the screen. But Christina says, I see a lot of folks in pharma using regulations as a shield to stay stuck in Industry 3.0. In your experience, are there other high compliance sectors that have actually cracked the code on being both agile and compliant, or is the red tape a valid excuse for us to lag behind? I love this question because I don't know the answer to it. So
I mean, if you look at ISPE, there's Pharma 4.0 as a framework that they've come up with, which is a modified version of the Architect specifically to pharma. I mean, this is where I would still view there is a large part of the processes and functions within I'm just going to call it the manufacturing function, all right, the actual production environment that can be upgraded to Industry 4.0 without impacting the regulatory requirements, let alone if you want to use technology to improve or speed up or make more efficient the actual compliant parts. I'm not even going to talk about that one. I'm just going to talk about all the stuff that doesn't even really relate to it. There are functions related to maintenance and others that you can make massive improvements on that don't impact the actual, I'm going to call it the standardized processes for making the product, the traceability, the documentation requirements, that are necessary there, let alone if you want to use it for that. The hardest part that people find with the technology is the explainability, I'm saying, of AI. It's depending on if you're saying AI, which I'm going to carve out on its own, or all the other technologies. Good examples, digital twins are very, very easy to implement, and you can ride them above your actual processes. So now you're just getting information collection that you can use for analysis, but it's not actually controlling or impacting anything real time. If you want to use AI, same way, are you using it to draw insights on what's happening, or using AI to automatically control back the process? And that's a big difference. But usually the biggest thing that people run into is explainability. And that's what's stalling it more than the actual capability, is that people have a hard time explaining how they're meeting requirements and regulations using some of that technology. So starting point, there's so much out there in pharma that you can do without touching that before you even tackle that part.
Yeah. Now I would say, just even outside of pharma, in manufacturing in general, one thing we have seen, to Christina's point, is, I think this is more of a change management issue, is when you have resistance to change, sometimes you'll see people that say, well, you don't understand how regulations work on our industry, or I'm in Brazil and the reporting requirements here are so different that you just would never understand. Therefore, we can't implement your changes that you're suggesting. So I think it can be smoke screen in some ways for change resistance. But to your point, I think there's ways around that for sure. Also, I want to say hello to Lean on LinkedIn, joining from Holland. And then I want to read a comment. I won't put it on the screen just because it's a longer comment, but it's a good one. This is from Nelson on LinkedIn. Nelson says, when we talk about transformation, we must clearly define the real outcomes we expect at both the program and strategic levels. Every transformation is ultimately delivered through projects, and it is essential that the change management team provides accurate, timely, and actionable information about what the transformation truly represents for the organization. So building on what you'd said earlier around, making sure you've got a clear vision of what it is you want to be, and then ultimately converting that into execution. And then this leads to an audience question I think is a really good one here from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, what capabilities must exist inside an organization before they're truly ready to pursue an Industry 4.0 transformation? I know data is one. You talked about that, but what else would you say?
I mean, the biggest capabilities, you need to have your foundational infrastructure ready to have the right data at the right time to the right people. And that requires a lot of stuff to happen to come together. It requires like a network infrastructure, it requires a data infrastructure, it requires the right applications so that you have the right information at the right time. And a huge component of that is just the data contextualization of, do we know what this data means and when that data should be presented to which person at which time and what it should be a part of and what decisions. That's a huge foundational piece, and it's massive. But if you can get that, all the other cool technologies that are out there, most notably AI right now, can easily run on top of that. Otherwise, you're going to invest a ton of money in AI and barely get a lot out of it. You're just going to be like just using only a fraction of what its capability is, because you don't have it real data. You're using it as like a chat GPT with public information rather than your company's information.
Right. Great points. Zach on LinkedIn says, hey, gang, here's a comment that I want to convert into a question. And I'm going to tie this back to Emma. We were talking about Emma earlier and how you shared a stage with her. And I imagine she talked a lot about people and change management type stuff. This question is very much related to that. So I'll ask you to bring out your inner Emma roll-off and combine it with your manufacturing background. But Juan on LinkedIn says, at the end, is the correct balance between compliance, productivity, and people care. Depending on the industry, each pillar is bigger or not, but we must care about people integrity, growth, and well-being if possible. So it's more of a comment, but maybe I'll turn it into a question for you, Jeff. And that is, how does change management, I know this is a big question, so I'm trying to figure out how to narrow it down a bit for you, but just what's your knee-jerk reaction to how change management fits into all this? I mean, as far as the people side of things, the human dimension, I know we've talked a lot about strategic vision, executive alignment, data, architecture. We've talked a lot about all these different components, but what about the people side? What are your just general observations or lessons there?
I mean, if you use the word transformation, it starts and ends with people. If the people don't change, you did not transform. You can install a system, but if people aren't using it, and if they're not using it in a different way, then you didn't transform. Because you may install a new system and they're working around it, or they're figuring out how to do their old job the same way with a new system. That's not transformation. So yes, it starts with having a good vision. It's then having a strategy. And a big component of that strategy is, how are we going to actually transform? There is a huge amount in the processes and people side that have to happen. I mean, most companies way underestimate the amount of time it takes to just communicate what the changes are and get people kind of on board with wanting to change. If you talk to good digital transformation leaders, whoever is tasked with the transformation of the company, you'll find that easily half of their time, more than half their time, is just communicating to people what's happening over and over and over and over and over again, let alone having a change management office of a team that's tasked with training, that's tasked with actually going out and upskilling, reskilling, and getting the people on board. But if you don't, you're gonna be one of those failure statistics that, hey, you got a good ROI, but you didn't change anything. I mean, so yes, all transformation starts and ends with people, and they always will be. There's nothing unique about digital there. It's just all transformation. Otherwise, you didn't transform.
Yeah. Yeah, I would argue you probably won't get the ROI if you don't address that people side of it. Maybe you do, but I
Well,
think
that's
just
what I would say. The KPMG study said 99% of those projects achieved at least 1% ROI, and then they went up from there. You can modernize a system and it reduce your number of, let's say, IT tickets, or reduce, some like downtime from a stability issue. You didn't transform anything, but it was worth the spend.
yeah, very interesting. Um, so Zach on LinkedIn, I swear I did not plant this question or pay him to say this, but Zach says still looking for speakers or sponsors for Digital Stratosphere. Yes, we are. Our Digital Stratosphere conference is coming up in September, and we are looking for speakers and sponsors. So if you have ideas, such as maybe, who knows, maybe Jeff Winters will end up joining us. Maybe we ask the audience, what do you think? Should I formally invite Jeff live and put him on the spot and say, hey, will you come speak at our Digital Stratosphere event? Tell me what you
This
think.
isn't live enough.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. All right. So I want to come back to a thought there. We talked about change management. Let me get rid of this question off the screen. What are the biggest pain points that manufacturers are raising with you right now? As you go around the country, you're speaking at events, you're talking to manufacturers all the time. What are the biggest pain points you're hearing from other manufacturing companies?
Sure. I'd probably say it is three things. And the third one, I think, is probably because of the first two. And one is data fragmentation. I mean, people are realizing that they have way more data than they realize, created by way more sources than they realize, all being created differently. And so you end up having data everywhere, but reality exists nowhere in any one given spot. And so it's very removed from the decision making process because of its fragmentation. So that's probably the first thing. I mean, that's where, if you look at the amount of time it takes just to make sense of data, is huge. The second is complexity. And this is complexity across many different things, realizing that manufacturing processes are extremely complex, realizing the technologies themselves are new and often complex, and then the integration of tying them all together in the proper architectures that align to a new operating model is complex. And so I think as a result of both of those, you end up getting scaling successful pilots is the biggest challenge. That's like what it results in is we're having trouble scaling our pilot, because once again, if you go back to what I said kind of earlier, one of the things that people do wrong is they treat transformation as a collection of small little projects. Usually they'll start with pilots. You take a pilot, you go, we want to test this technology. Let's go do it on that line over there. And you get it functionally operative. Like it works. But that is not scaling. That's not considering how do we roll this out 5,000 times in 30 factories in 8 different countries, and go, how do we do this in different environments? And that's a whole different level of skill and foresight that most companies don't fully prepare for. Is we didn't think of the scenarios that are necessary to properly pilot. A proof of technology working is super easy, and if you can't do that, I don't even know where to start, because
Right.
almost any vendor that will work on that pilot. But you need someone that can help you go, yeah, but are you considering all these factors the moment you attempt to roll it out across the company? So that ends up becoming where things stall, is moving from pilot to scale. And I think it's because of complexity and data fragmentation.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. It brings it full circle back to one of the first things you said in this conversation, which is manufacturers have been accumulating these bits and pieces of competencies over the years. They just haven't figured out how to pull it all together until more recently. And the ones that are successful are the ones that are figuring that out. It sounds
The
like.
ones that, and they invest in architecture, like enterprise architecture, governance, and standardization. So you don't end up creating hundreds of tiny custom projects and tiny custom one-offs and exceptions everywhere. And then you're doing a lot of work, but you're not getting back to transforming.
Right. Right. Um, Ricardo on LinkedIn says, come visit Colorado, Jeff. And that is where our Digital Stratosphere event is. So we got at least one vote of someone saying that I should invite you to
All right.
Stratosphere in Denver. I want to come back to, there's a couple questions here I want to get to. Here's one from Sanjay on LinkedIn. He says, how do you maintain the downsizing the capabilities for the transformation projects in change management?
What do you mean downsizing the capabilities?
Yeah, maybe you could restate that, Sanjay. I thought I knew what it meant, and then as I was reading, I actually don't understand what the question is either. But yeah, I'm intrigued by it though, because you're talking about change management, downsizing. Intriguing. I thought he was talking about downsizing as a company and how do you manage. But we'll come back to that. Here's a comment from Cassiana on LinkedIn. From an ERP implementation perspective, I often see companies wanting a lot of capabilities before stabilizing their core processes. Do you see that a lot in companies that are trying to go through like a formal Industry 4.0 smart factory change initiative where they have trouble, like they need to get their basic house in order before they start thinking too much about getting too far ahead of themselves on a transformation?
I mean, I don't know if this is even limited to just ERP, but my experience from like, I'm going to call it ERP or MES, a lot of the driving factor for those particular projects, because they're usually labeled an ERP project or an MES project,
Mm,
is a modernization project. Like they're realizing that this is a hindrance rather than an enabler. And so as soon as they view it as that, they're focusing on upgrade, whether it's because the old version of the software is now end of life and you're being forced to upgrade it, or there's some just basic capability that's necessary just to keep doing what you're doing. It ends up driving the upgrade into something that's stabilized. I actually see few, but not all, where companies go and evaluate ERP and MES, we'll call it vendors, and go, show me what your systems really can do if we took full advantage of everything that you offered. And you got to help us get there to take advantage of this. I see very few that are looking at that from a cutting edge. If you use, let's just use SAP or Oracle, it doesn't even matter from an ERP side, and use like their cutting edge offering, it could be extremely transformative. But I don't see many in their ERP upgrades doing that shift simultaneously. And that's normal. I mean, you can modernize your system first, get it functioning, then you can start to optimize it, getting the most out of what you already have. Then you can start taking advantage of new modules, capabilities, features of that system that will completely change workflows and people's jobs to transform. But to do it all at the same time is a big undertaking. But I don't see many starting with the vision of what can your system do? And we want to
right,
work towards that over the next 8 years.
right. Yeah, and a lot of times there's hidden value there. You know, you've already invested in some cases. You've already invested in the technology,
You
and
already bought the modules in some cases. You're not using them.
yeah, exactly. And it doesn't necessarily mean you need to go find new software and implement a new set of shelfware. You already have the shelfware that's been sitting there. You just aren't getting the value out of it. So it's a great point. I want to jump ahead and bring this all full circle. I'll jump ahead to a question that there's a lot of questions we didn't get to that I wanted to ask. So, which means, of course, we need to have you back on because we only got through about half the questions I had for you, and I know the audience has more questions too. But if we were to wrap this up and summarize, and you had to give manufacturers one piece of advice, or maybe I'll let you have two or three if you want, but a couple pieces of advice you'd give to manufacturers to focus on in the next 12 to 18 months, what would that be?
Um, I'm going to give two different answers here. First is I always like to start with everyone making sure that they have the right art of the possible and the right art of the practical. And I like using this term. Everyone in the world should have the same view of the art of the possible. What can be done based off the technologies today? And that art of the possible is constantly evolving as new things come out. But you need to know what the art of the possible is. If you don't have a clear agreement across the teams making the decisions, you're always going to limit what you can do. The art of the practical is what your company realistically should do within that art of the possible. And that will be different for every company based off your maturity, your goals, your industry, a whole bunch of different factors. But what I see happen is a lot of companies, they start to develop their art of the practical, their vision down here, thinking that it is the art of the possible. When I have to go, no. You can do this. You're down here. So you've already handicapped and limited yourself before you ever started because of the vision of what you think can be done. It's okay if this is what you do, but don't do it because you think that that is cutting edge and leading and what's possible. No, it's just what you're doing. This is what's possible. So the first is understanding everyone in the world should have that same art of the possible. And then everyone needs to have their own unique art of the practical for what their company is going to do. So that's more of a visionary thing, but educate yourself. Spend the time as a team to make sure we're all talking about what the same thing looks like at the end. What can we do if we use all the technologies today? And the second is just more of a practical thing to do is you need to work on the data and architecture foundation that is going to enable intelligence across your operations. because everyone's wanting intelligence and they're realizing that you're going to be just limited if you don't have the basics in place. And this includes, just to start, get your data accessible and contextualized. Just at a bare minimum, that's a massive project. I'm underplaying the level of work that's required, but that is a project that if you justify it the right way, if you understand how it links to all the different transformation initiatives you can do, it should justify itself in a heartbeat. Because that one project in itself won't really provide much ROI, but is going to enable so many other projects to be possible. And if you present that in the right way, you need to start working on that project now. If you don't have a modern, updated data architecture and network and infrastructure in line, I don't know why you're doing any of your other projects.
Right. Sounds like you've got bigger fish to fry, and maybe just focus on those. Yeah. Yeah. This is great stuff. I appreciate you being here today, Jeff. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you? I assume LinkedIn's a great way. Connect.
Yeah, I mean, that's how most people know me. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So message me there, and happy to answer questions. And yeah, I'd love to be back. It was fun.
Yeah, this is fun. And we've got a lot more we haven't uncovered. So love to have you back some point later this year, and we'll keep an eye out. We'll get another invitation out to you, and we'll get an invitation out to you for Stratosphere too. And hopefully we can see you in September in Denver. I'd love to have you there. We get a lot of manufacturers that show up at that conference, and I know that's your thing, is out speaking to other manufacturers. So I'd love to have you there. So thanks for being here today, Jeff. Really appreciate it. And thank you to the audience for the great questions. This podcast, this discussion actually will become part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast. What we do is we edit this, we add some more content to it. We'll re-release the conversation as part of a formalized, polished episode of Transformation Ground Control. If you don't listen to or watch that podcast, you can just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes. We've done about 260 some episodes, so be sure to check it out. Transformationgroundcontrol.com. This episode, I believe, will air next week, next Wednesday. So every Wednesday we put out new episodes. So thanks for being part of the live production of that podcast. If you'd like to talk about your digital transformation initiative and like to learn more about how we can help, reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat about Third Stage and how we help clients, including manufacturers, but not limited to manufacturers, through their digital transformation journeys. And I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. We do these live discussions every week. So I hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks again, Jeff, for being here, and take care.